So some of you may have had the impression that this was going to be a cryptocurrencies talk, and it originally was going to be, but then like Bitcoin went over $10,000, and then suddenly everyone in the universe was like, "Hey, you worked at a company that does Bitcoin. What are Bitcoin?" And then I didn't want to talk about Bitcoin anymore. so none of that. So what we're actually going to talk about is how cool it is to have a clicker. Yes, great success. So what we're going to talk about is something very dear to my heart, which is cryptography. Specifically, some small niche areas of it. Specifically, what it can be used for, and we're going to dive into like how some of these things work and kind of break apart some of the black boxes and look inside them and see what they do. So I'm very excited. Off the bat, oh, no, there we go. I just want to disclaim that I am not a cryptographer. There are very few people who are cryptographers who can like invent new crypto and be like certain about how it works. And I would love to someday be one of those people, but I am currently not. So, like don't found your startup based on the blockchain stuff I talk about later. But yeah, so opening like nice and general, what is cryptography? So for all you, I guess, Latin buffs out there, crypto and graphy, we've got our secret and writing. And the beautiful thing about cryptography is we've got this like wonderful world of computation where data is like the thing that everything works with, and data like powers our lets us do cool stuff. But we don't necessarily want all of the cool stuff we have to be inside these computers. And so we have to somehow draw distinctions between what we share, especially when things are so connected. We got, like the internet. There's a lot of people on the internet. There's a lot of like, malware bots on the internet. And so it's nice for them not to have our like, MySpace passwords and stuff. Yeah, that was, yeah. All right. So in order to do things online, it's often useful to trust other parties. And I hope everyone has heard the like, don't trust anyone on the internet spiel, because it's definitely a good one. But sometimes we need to get stuff done, like we need to like, I don't know, like pay rent or something and like log into our bank's website. And sometimes we need to like share memes that only other people, very specific people, can see. And so we want to be able to do these things. And it requires some amount of trust, and establishing that trust over an importantly untrustworthy channel. We're basically throwing paper airplanes across the world that anyone could grab and open and read. And so we can use specific strategies to try to protect them. And we've got goals and we want to achieve them. So there are various ways we can use cryptography to do this. And I'm going to sort of high-level breeze through a few of them so we can get to the cool stuff. But there's this notion of provenance of data, where like we can track where some data originated and like importantly whether or not someone we expected created a piece of data that we're if we're receiving a letter that's like important, it's nice to know that let's say letter was created by who we expected it to have been. And back in the day, that was like melt some wax and put a stamp on it. Thankfully now we've made a couple advances in that regard. I don't know what's going on in this photo, but it looks pretty secure. And so we have this idea of a digital signature, and there are algorithms which implement these things that we can run on our data and gain this sort of benefit of signing data. But these systems can break down, and I would absolutely love it if someone wanted to shout out what a way that these can break down. But I'm also happy to dive right into it, because this is like we're just going to blaze through some of these crypto things. Anyone want to just yell one out? Cool, that's totally fine. I didn't give you enough context. So if we're signing something, we're getting a piece of data that says like, okay, cool, this is from a key, some secret that I expected it to be from. But people and keys are distinct entities. And so just because we know that some data came from a specific secret, we don't necessarily know that was the secret that it needed to be signed with. And so we have these wonderful complex hierarchical systems called, on the internet, called certificate authorities, or CAs. And that's essentially like, I'm going to give one set of keys to your laptop as you install the browser, and then you can use that key to make sure that the website you're talking to is coming from the party you expect it to. And the way that works is by sort of chaining together these things, but it relies on the fact that you were handed this one key right at the beginning. You have something that you know you can trust a priori to any communication you're doing. You have a basis for your trust, and then that thing verifies, whoever's on the internet telling you that they are, bank.com, and then bank, you get that thing, and it's like, okay, this looks good, everything is consistent, and this is all rooted in this key that I implicitly trusted at the beginning. And little red flags spin in my head when I hear implicitly trusted, because we're talking about the internet. It's wonderful that we can install a browser and probably have keys that we can rely on built into those, but it'd be a huge issue if those keys were bad. And this pie chart, given absolutely no context at all, should be taken for exactly what it is, which is a pie chart. But what it talks about is market share in 2016 of CAs. And there was this sort of small, obscure certificate authority called Komodo that people were like, hey, they're doing some really fishy stuff. And then someone was like, how many keys do they sign? It was like, oh no, it's like most of them. So you always have these wonderful little revelations where it's like, oh, that key that I've been implicitly trusting is like owned by someone working out of like that shack in the Ukraine, and like, maybe we really trust like, Ukrainian CA number 785, but maybe we don't. Not to single out anyone from the Ukraine, but just there's a lot of internet spam that originates there.
I hate when you say the.
The?
Yeah, it's just Ukraine.
Okay. So we run into these issues where we're implicitly trusting something that we don't necessarily want to be. And so what I want to get into with this talk is how can we, without any prior, like sort of, no implicitly trusted keys, how can we bootstrap our communication to get to a point where we can trust something about the message we're receiving? Maybe we can't necessarily say, oh, it's guaranteed to be from this one person, but we can guarantee some interesting and meaningful things about information. And so, let's just dive right into it. Cool. So one of these notions is called proof of work. You may have heard this in reference to Bitcoin, or if you're sort of interested in that space. But proof of work is, I would like to be able to know that someone else has done some amount of computation before I, accept an email from them or something like that. And the sort of original application of this was super clever. It was called Hashcash and applied to email. You had to essentially show that you had run a difficult-to-run algorithm that takes some time to run before your email was allowed to be forwarded along. And what this meant was that, like, if I'm just sending an email from my laptop, okay, my laptop maybe whirs for a second and then sends the email. But if I'm a spammer trying to send 10 billion emails in the course of a day, then I'm going to have to run this algorithm so many times that it becomes totally infeasible. And it's this wonderful little problem of scale where, like, if I'm just sending one email every 15 minutes, or if it's like, career week and everyone's emailing White Hat, like, hey, let's do events, then maybe like one email every minute. It was this nice problem of scale where, like, people can still interact in a way that they're very comfortable with, but someone who's doing the malicious use case, the spamming use case, for example, suffers massively because they have to run this hard algorithm over and over and over again. This particular one was based on hash functions, which is something that Kylan's talk will actually get into later in the quarter. But the important part is that basically it's a difficult algorithm to run that doesn't have shortcuts. You have to do the work, and you send along a little proof of this work. And how those exactly work is what I want to get into. Cool. Another instance of proof of work is blockchains. So this is for anyone who was coming to the cryptocurrency event. We're going to dive into blockchains a little bit. So the way blockchains use proof of work is there are a bunch of people making a bunch of transactions. And the way a transaction looks is this. Let's say this is like a Bitcoin address, which is essentially a pseudonym that stands in for your name when you're doing a transaction. And this can be sort of a random string, hence some amount of anonymity. This pen sucks. There are no pens. Cool. Does anyone have a marker? Is anyone the best?
We have to erase.
Not erasing is better than not writing, though. I'm willing to stay here and scrub. Thank you so much. Oh, no, is this a Sharpie? It says dry erase on it, so we're just going to believe it. Trust implicitly. Cool. So we've got, oh, nice. This really looks like a Sharpie. Well, that's a problem for future Macs. So we've got this address, and let's say that that's like, hello, because random strings are hard to come up with. The way I have some Bitcoin is if someone said, hey, at one point, I sent a Bitcoin over there. And the way I send that to someone else is by using digital signatures to say, hello, I am hello. That's my public-facing address. I have a secret, let's call it S for secret, that I'm not showing anyone. And I can sign a transaction going out to someone else with my secret. These two, the secret and the public keys, are related. The way that the specific algorithm works depends on them being sort of mathematically related in a few interesting ways. But the relationship between these two is that if someone sends something to the public key, signs it to my public key, which in this example is hello, I can then sign that transaction with my private key to someone else. And so we create this sort of chain of like, they sent it to me, and everyone can see which address it went to. But then only the person who holds that secret can send it somewhere else. And so it's essentially just an endless chain of redirections. And so you can actually go back and trace every single Bitcoin, like where the path it's gone. And some of them, sometimes, you split them in half. If I wanted to send someone half a Bitcoin, I would sign a transaction sending them half and sending half back to myself. Because there isn't you don't have a pot full of Bitcoins. There's no account with some money in it. It's all just where is that Bitcoin pointing? So then I sign this transaction off to someone else. I sign this transaction back to myself. And there we go. I've got half a Bitcoin more to spend. If I want to spend that in the future, I send it somewhere else and sign this new transaction. And so what you end up with is this chain of verification. You sent money to you, who sent money to you, who sent money to you, who sent money to you. And so value is being exchanged in that who is allowed to sign the next transaction sort of moves along. And the way proof of work comes into this is when I have a transaction, it has to be verified, has to be added to the blockchain. And there are groups of people who are incentivized to run the very expensive algorithms to do this proof of work. Because if they're the ones who verify a transaction, they can also add a transaction into the set of things that they're verifying that says, and 10 Bitcoins go to me. And that is just a thing that we accept as part of the protocol, that whoever mines the block is allowed to create a transaction pointing at themselves out of thin air that gives them some Bitcoin, which is the incentive scheme for everyone's trying to mine the next block because it allows them to give some Bitcoin to themselves and therefore profit. Different schemes are used in different cryptocurrencies, but this is sort of like the OG successful one, which is why a lot of them are based off of this model. The proof of work comes in is that in order to mine a block, you have to run this difficult algorithm, which is the operation is a hash, and you're running it on a set of transactions, let's say like T1 through Tn, one of these being the transaction that sends you a bunch of money out of thin air, and a random string. And the output of this is some fixed length piece of data. Let's say, it's 128 bits of data. And in order for this block to be valid, I have to have this number be lower, the output of this function be a number lower than a given number. And what that generally means is lots of leading zeros, because all zeros and a 1 would be a very low number, and all ones would be the highest possible number. So I have to just keep changing this thing that doesn't matter because it changes the output of this hash function until I get a nice low number, and then it becomes a valid block when that number is low enough. And what counts as low enough sort of evolves over time, depending on how quickly the blocks are coming out. They make it easier if blocks aren't coming out very quickly, or harder if they are coming out too quickly, just to kind of keep it at a nice steady rate. But the proof of work is, okay, I've got a bunch of transactions I want to verify. I'm going to pick a random number, hash this whole thing, see if I get a nice low number here. And an important note there is that we're trying to find an answer to this question, what random string can we put here to get an output we want here. So we are giving the answer to that question as our proof of work. We submit this whole thing, including the random number. Other people can run this algorithm and see, oh yeah, that was a nice low number, and therefore it's valid. Yeah, what's up?
So how is finding this low number useful to the transaction?
It's not. It's only to prove that you've done the work.
So why does someone have to do the work for the transaction?
Because in order for the blockchain to be in a state that everyone agrees which transactions have gone on, it has to be difficult to add new transactions on. Otherwise, everyone would just add on transactions that benefited them. By making it difficult, it makes it so that people are disincentivized to just tack on random transactions because they'll be ignored.
So disincentivized to send money with Bitcoin?
It does disincentivize to send money with Bitcoin, but it specifically disincentivizes sending money that you don't have, just transactions that are spurious and not actually backed by this verification. The economics of Bitcoin are an issue sort of in and of themselves. The important thing to note here is that it's difficult to verify in order to allow for a system where people can agree that someone has put in the work, but not necessarily be able to make up the fact that they've done the work. Does that help?
I don't get why it matters if someone did the work.
It's the only way to show that this set of transactions was a valid step forward for the blockchain. That this new set of transactions were actually verified, that were actually essentially accounted for. Yeah, what's up?
So this comes from the idea that you need does this have anything to do with the idea of needing consensus about?
It does. The idea of consensus is that everyone should agree on what transactions are valid, and by doing this amount of work, you are essentially making it difficult for someone else to forge that those transactions didn't happen.
So you just need a more powerful computer?
Yes. So that's why you've seen this whole race to make faster and faster hashing computers so that they can compute these really, really quickly. Because if you win this race, you can give yourself some Bitcoin. And because you've validated those transactions into a block, you are allowed by the protocol to give yourself some Bitcoins out of nowhere. It's a really interesting balance of economics and technical solutions to economic problems that I don't want to get too deep into. But the general idea is that by solving a hard problem, you've done something that other people were disincentivized to do in order to collectively perform the accounting required to send Bitcoins around. Does that?
I'm still confused, but you can move on.
Cool. Yeah, all right, so moving right along. Proofs of work. And so the takeaway that I want for this one is that you are giving away the answer in order to prove that you've done this work. You are showing what this random string was, and then other people can say, okay, I can look at these transactions, I can take your random data, hash it all, and see, oh yes, that was a low number. So what we'd love to do is prove that we know something without giving it away. And there's this sort of great example of what if I have some data, maybe it's some solution to a hard problem, and someone wants to buy it. Well, how do I prove that I have the solution without giving it away? And then if I've given it away, why would they buy it? So it's a nice, very pragmatic answer, but in general, this is just in my opinion, this is just a really cool idea that this is even possible, that we can prove that we know something without actually showing what it is. And so what these are called is zero knowledge proofs. We've given away zero knowledge about what we are trying to prove, while also proving that we know it. So there's some really, really cool examples that I'd like to go into. So the first one is it's referred to as the cave of Alibaba, or Alibaba's cave. And the general construction for this one is neat. So let's say I want to prove that I know the secret word that lets me into through some gate. So we've got this cave, and we're going to get the above view that shows us sort of what's actually going on. because we're sort of like the omnipotent viewers here. So we've got two people, and this person, we'll call them the verifier, and this person the prover, who's going to prove some knowledge, are the two parties in this game. The prover would like to prove that they know the secret password to get through this door. This door is locked unless you give it the password, then you can go through it once. The verifier wants to verify that the prover knows the secret word. The prover does not want to give them the secret. Easy solution, give them the secret word. They go, they try it, they get through, cool, proved. But we've given away the secret word. So without giving away the secret word, we can actually run a game of sorts that proves that we know this information without giving it away. And it actually ends up being pretty simple. You just sort of walk into the verifier is going to ask us to come out of the cave, and so we can walk into this cave, and let's say it's a nice closed off entrance, so they can't see which way we go here. So as the prover, we'll walk to this side of the cave. The verifier will then, not knowing which side we've walked to, call out a side, say you have to come out of this, like say this end or this end, and for that part they're allowed to see which end we come out of. So in general, we play the game by starting off here. I've drawn them over here because they're both like our people in the game. But they call out a side for us to exit the cave. If they call out this side, we can give the password to the door and come out this side. If they call out this side, we can just walk straight out as the prover. And so because we didn't know which side they were going to say first, in order for us to win this game, notice the important distinction. In order for us to win this game every time, we have to know the password. If we don't know the password and they tell us we have to come out this side, we didn't know that. We went up here, and then we're toast. We try to walk out this side. We try to sneak around here and then run out. It's not going to work. And so just one round of this game, we may have gotten lucky. But if you play this game 100 times, we have a 1 over 2, 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. We have a 50% chance of doing it right, of guessing right each time. So if you play this game, let's say 100 times, this is a very, very tiny probability that we've guessed correctly which side you were going to say every time, and gotten out that side of the cave without the password. So the more rounds we play this game, the surer this verifier can be that we know the password. And now in theory, we can say, and you can do it, if you can do it n times and you can do it one more time, then you can do it infinite times and you're 100% sure that they know the password. Pragmatically, we can't do it infinite number of times, so we do it a reasonable number of times. Generally, 2 to the 128 is considered very, very, very probable that we've not gotten this lucky. This is on the order of like guessing the correct atom on planet Earth. This is a very rare event if this is the probability. And so the verifier can say, okay, we've played 128 rounds of this game, and you've won every single time. I believe you. I'm willing to believe that you know this password, even though you haven't given it to me. So we've just proven something that we know without giving it away, which is just like, it's awesome. I love it. Another example, very, very similar idea at its kind of core, is that if we have someone who is perfectly colorblind as our verifier, and we have a red rubber ball and a green rubber ball, then they're going to, the verifier will hide these two. They cannot distinguish them. They're completely identical except for color. They're going to hide them behind their back and then either switch them or not, and then show them to us, and we have to say whether we've switched it or not. We have to tell them, yeah, you switched them, or oh no, you didn't switch them. And of course, this sounds sort of trivial if you aren't red-green colorblind. It's like, okay, yeah, I can see the red one went from their right hand to their left hand, or vice versa, or whatever. But this proves to the verifier that we can tell when they've switched it. That's something that they not only don't know, but can't know in this example. But we've proved that we can distinguish these two, that they have no reason to believe are distinguishable, except for the fact that we know something that we couldn't otherwise know. We've proven that we can identify the two because there's a 50% chance we guessed right if they chose randomly whether to switch or not to switch. So if we get that right once, maybe we got lucky. If we get it right 10,000 times, there's essentially no way we got that lucky. And so it's this really cool idea of like, based on probability, how likely is it that we could have gotten this right? And computational schemes that achieve the same thing are based on a similar idea of proving, or at least arguing, that you know something. And that's where the wonderful acronym ZK SNARK comes from. It stands for zero knowledge, succinct something argument of knowledge. And we are making an argument because we are not 100% proving it, because we can't play infinite rounds of these games. We are simply making a strong case that we know a given piece of knowledge. Succinct, because the nice thing about not having to play an infinite game is that the algorithm is much shorter. If we're playing a fixed number of rounds of this game, we don't have to encode we can actually encode that as some data rather than encoding it as infinite rounds. Yeah, what's up?
So instead of repeatedly entering the cave, you could simultaneously enter 128 different caves.
Exactly.
Okay.
You can play the whole game succinctly because it's a fixed size. And of course, they could ask you to play the game multiple times if they don't believe you. But at that point, we're talking about getting so lucky that it's just never going to happen. Yeah, what's up?
So zero knowledge proofs are not proofs in the traditional sense. They're probabilistically unlikely, similar to how we don't have perfectly secure systems, we have probabilistically secure systems.
We trade off an ability to actually implement a zero knowledge proof for it being an argument versus a proof.
Cool.
There are systems which perfectly prove. I mean, if you run induction on this to say you can do it forever, then it is an actual proof. But because we can't pragmatically do it forever, we call it either an argument, or we call it a useful zero knowledge proof. And so I want to dive into the technical aspects of one that's really, really neat, and we'll also segue into our next thing. So this is a graph. A graph is a set of nodes, and I realize I just walked out of the camera range, of nodes and edges. A graph can represent anything from like you and your group of friends. You're connected if you're friends. Maybe a social network might look like a giant, very interconnected web. A graph can represent, roads between cities. We can travel between these two cities because there's a road. Can't travel between those two cities because there's no path. These are super, super useful models in computer science because we can then say like, hey, how do we visit each of these nodes once? A practical application, maybe you're trying to visit every baseball stadium in the US and you want to take some cool path to all of them. Other applications, what is the least expensive path? Maybe that's the shortest path, or the one with the least toll roads, for example, on the way, or the least total value of tolls on the way. And so if we can model things like this, we can run in a computer, we can run algorithms on them and calculate these types of things. However, given a graph, there are a lot of possible ways to move through it. I mean, if you look at this one, it's very, very connected. And the red path that's highlighted is a path that visits every node once and exactly once, which is very actually hard to find. If you think about what an algorithm that would achieve this looks like, it looks like, let's try a path. We got stuck in a little loop over here. We hit some multiple nodes. Okay, let's throw that path away. Let's try a different one. Maybe we can base it off of the original path and take some shortcuts. But eventually, these paths are very, very hard to find because there isn't a nice, efficient algorithm to solve them. We essentially have to just try a bunch of things and then, look, we found one of the paths. And if you look at this graph, there are a lot. There's the one in red sort of obscures this fact, but if you think about there are a ton of different ways to get from any one node to any other node in this graph. You can go all the way around, you can go halfway around, zigzag through. There's just so many ways, and the bigger these graphs get, the faster that grows. It grows exponentially, and it's actually proven that finding a path that visits every node exactly once it's proven that we don't know a comparably efficient algorithm which is to say, if you've taken like algorithms or whatever, it's in the class of NP complete. If that's not helpful, then whatever. What we can for sure say is that for a big enough graph, this problem is intractable to do efficiently. We can't just do it on the fly. Maybe we do a bunch of pre-computation and we can solve this problem, but it's a hard problem for computers to solve. And so we can actually leverage the fact that this is a difficult problem to solve by in the proof that we maybe know something like a Hamiltonian path. Actually, I'll just point at this one. So let's say our verifier and our prover. Let's say our verifier wants to purchase this Hamiltonian cycle, information about how I can get through a graph G, let's call it G, efficiently. So both our prover, I'm going to write on the board. Both our prover and our verifier know the graph G. They both know we know what we're talking about. We've agreed upon this is the graph that's interesting. Maybe it's all the toll roads in the U.S. and how to get between them. So both our prover and our verifier know G. What our prover wants to prove is that they know a path through G that has this quality, this Hamiltonian cycle is what it's called. They know how to get through this graph visiting every node once. Obviously, they don't want to give this away. It took them a long time to find out what that path was, but they need to prove that they know it. Otherwise, they could just be lying. And so what our prover will do is they will come up with a graph that is very similar to G, but essentially with if we put like a label 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on each of the vertices, each of the black dots, this other graph H would be the same thing with the labels shifted around. It's called isomorphic, which if that's helpful, great. If it's not, great. But it's a similar graph that interestingly we can take a Hamiltonian cycle on G and convert it very efficiently into a Hamiltonian cycle on H. So it's similar enough that our cycle is still relevant, but it's different enough that we'll be able to hide some information, which is going to become important. So P has to pick something H, and they're not going to tell the verifier what this H is. They're going to know it. What's up? Did I get a question? Okay, cool. And what they're going to do is they're going to commit to H. We'll talk about how that can be done later, but for now, imagine basically they draw H on a piece of paper, put the piece of paper face down in between the prover and the verifier. So they cannot change this after they've committed to it. And so the verifier will then say, okay, each round that we play this game, I can ask you for either what your H is, or give me some definition of, let's call the cycle, like some representation of that cycle, like C of G. That's what we're trying to prove we have, the cycle on G. Each round, I can either ask you for the cycle on H or H. If I ask you for both, then I can efficiently calculate C of G, because if I have H, this was an efficient computation. If I have C of H, the prover going from C of G to C of H was an efficient computation. But given only one of these, I don't get the full picture. So essentially, being given C of H would look like, you're not given the fact that these edges exist. You're only given, this set of edges. We don't know. It could be some other graph entirely that happens to have a set of edges that look like a Hamiltonian cycle. We won't know as the verifier. But the fact that we can ask every single round, we can ask for one of these, gives us that similar principle of, well, if they're guessed correctly which one we were going to ask for every time, that's just so vanishingly unlikely that we can trust that they do, in fact, have the answer to this question. And so each round, P will have to give up something that can be seen to be isomorphic to G, or something that looks like a valid Hamiltonian cycle on some graph. And you might notice, well, there's a problem here. I mean, if they ask us for H, we could make something up. If they ask us for C of H, we could sort of make something up. But what's critical here is that you've committed to H. You can't change this H after this negotiation has begun. So if you wrote it down on the paper and put that paper face down on the table, you won't be able to make up something because they might ask you for it, and then that paper might be flipped face up, and they'll see if you were lying about knowing an H. And so cryptographic commitment is how you can do that, aside from writing it on a piece of paper and putting it face down. And that's what we'll dive into next. Yeah, what's up?
So do you need to be able to generate, is there an efficient algorithm to go from C of G to C of H?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It's very similar to the algorithm. So if I figured out an H that is an isomorphic to G, the set of changes we have to make to G to get H is a similar function. The structure of the function is similar to how to get from here to here.
Cool.
Yeah, what's up?
What ensures that you don't just make a random C of H? I understand not making just random H because you verify that or that you've committed to that ahead of time. But then why every time can't you just come up with a random C of H to go with that H and just commit to the H? How do they know that C of H actually goes with the H?
You have to give them something that looks like a valid Hamiltonian cycle, and you won't be able to come up with that right on the spot. The reason why you can offer this is because you already know this. If you didn't know C of G, you wouldn't be able to come up with something that looked like C of H efficiently.
Oh, I see.
Right, because you could have come up with H. H could be your favorite graph, but you would have to have known C of H beforehand. You can't calculate it on the fly because it's inefficient. Yeah, what's up?
So, what if you have some random graph that you really like that you know a Hamiltonian cycle for?
Mm-hmm.
You just always use that one for H and C of H?
So let's say we have our favorite graph F, and we have something that's C of F, but F has no relation to G whatsoever. That's really bad notation. Yeah, F has nothing to do with G. The reason we can't give, so we could give C of F and get away with it a few times. The problem would be is if we gave C of F, they might ask, if we gave this pair, they might ask for F. Eventually, they would ask for F when we're trying to pretend that we've given them H, right? So if we choose F and commit to F, and they ask for, they're just as likely to ask for C of F as F itself.
So, if they're asking a bunch of times, why couldn't you just give them both?
What do you mean?
So, if they ask the first time, you give them C of F, and they ask again, you have to give them F.
You can never give them both. If you give them both, they have the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how does that?
I guess what I'm confused on is every time we play the game, do I generate a new H?
Yes.
That's
If you can play 2 rounds, get this, and then get this, you've won. The verifier has won. They've gotten the information. Sorry, yes. H has to be different every time so that you're not accidentally giving away the
So I
answer.
can efficiently generate H's from G, and I can
Yes.
efficiently generate C of H's given C of G.
Yes,
I can efficiently generate these pairs if I know the secret.
precisely. That is exactly. Does that help? Yeah, what's up?
Okay, one last thing. And the verifier can tell if C of H looks pretty much correct, so you can't just generate a random solution.
Yes, because they're given essentially just the links of this path. They can see, hey, one of those links is broken, what the heck? And so they won't necessarily know how those links relate to G because of the essentially the shuffling around that occurs between G and H. Yeah, what's up?
Are we, I don't want to so I don't want to derail, but
No,
what
we're
I'm
good.
confused about is, you said it's an efficient algorithm to go from G to H.
Yep.
But so can the verifier grab C of H and then go from G to, just start trying to generate H's from G? Or is that not an efficient algorithm?
You can come up with one and then do that same. So you can go from G to H and then use that same translation to translate C of G to C of H.
Yeah.
If you have to try all possible H, that's inefficient.
Okay, cool.
So you can come up with one, but you can't come up with all of them.
Cool. Yep.
I imagine all the combinations of H are similar to finding the Hamiltonian cycle in the first place, because you're trying all routes.
Yeah. It's a similarly intractable problem because of the number of possibilities.
Cool.
Yeah. So basically, what we end up doing is after a certain number of rounds, we've convinced them that we must know the answer because we've successfully shown them either something that they can clearly see is a transformation of G, or something that is a valid Hamiltonian cycle for some graph. And after, let's say 128 rounds, let's say 10,000 rounds, we've won the game. It's vanishingly improbable that we've been able to lie every single time, just because we don't know which one they're going to pick. Now, note that's an interesting problem when you're doing this programmatically, is you have to actually randomly pick which one to check. So if they can figure out, oh, I know every third time they're going to ask for the cycle, and all the rest of the times they're going to ask for the graph. Then, if you know their strategy, you can lie to them all day. It is the fact that the prover doesn't know which one they're going to ask for, which means that they cannot successfully lie every single time, or they're so likely to be caught if they lie every single time that it's not effective for them to do that. Yeah, what's up?
Is there a danger of playing the game too many times? Like, you're gonna verify, can I just keep asking for the answer, and eventually you'll have a larger pool to kind of guess upon?
For a large enough graph, no.
Well, it just takes
Make the
too
graph
long.
big enough.
At that point, you could have just as efficiently been guessing H's for a G. You absolutely could, but the idea is that it's so hard to find this Hamiltonian cycle that it's more efficient for us to allow someone to prove to us that they have it and then buy it from them or whatever than it is for me to try to find it myself. If I can just try to find it myself and that's more efficient for me to do, why there's no reason for me to waste time playing this game. So there's certain, I guess, what ends up being economic incentives here. If this were literally I'm going to purchase some information for you, if I can figure that out easier on my own, then I may as well. For this graph is you can almost count on your fingers the number of vertices here. When we're talking about 10 million vertices, it just becomes so absolutely insane to try to calculate this that essentially the problem, you may as well not try to solve the problem, unless of course you have to, in which case you just get a big computer and tell it to run forever. Yeah, cool. So wrapping up this, we're going to take a little tour around some other neat things before I wrap up. Yeah, what's up?
So I guess the value is can I generate a Hamiltonian cycle and then make a complex graph without it? Is that how I generate it? It seems to be the problem is that the prover also has to solve this problem.
So you could make an arbitrary graph around it, but the interesting thing is that we've picked this G beforehand. There's some problem we're solving with regard to G.
Can I generate it and then hand out G and be like, hey, I have a solution to this? That's kind of the...
Yes, G is public knowledge in this scheme.
Well, how does the prover kind of collect things they can prove that they have?
Work,
Yeah,
essentially.
We're proving work, so it's they have to do something hard.
Yeah.
That's good.
Does that answer your question? Okay. And the nice thing is that the verifier could pick how big G is, and then know that in order to win this game, they will have had to have done some amount of work. If they pick a really complex G, you can ask them to prove that they've done heaps and heaps of work. If you pick a medium complex one, you can prove that they've done a medium amount of work and small, which sort of is advantageous to the scheme if you're asking the prover to prove something. This might be an authority that's asking this person to authenticate that they have a big enough computer to do this. Or maybe that someone you trust has the answer to this question because you gave it to them prior, and they can prove that they have it without giving it away, without necessarily knowing that you are who you say you are, which is the advantage of zero-knowledge proofs over something like a password, where I'm just going to give that password up and hope that the person I'm showing this password to is the person who they say they are. So otherwise, they have my password. They can log into something else as me. Tristan, is that a question?
It is 7.
Cool. All right, let's wrap right up. So I mentioned that they have to commit to this. Commitment schemes use 2 phases. One is you actually seal the envelope, and then later you might open it. Talk to me afterward if you want to know how this works, because it's kind of it's a neat one, but it's a bit technical. Similarly to how we can have some knowledge that we can verify without giving away, we can have problems that are difficult to identify probabilistically. So given the numbers on top here, big numbers with some prime factors, these prime factors multiply together to make the big numbers. If I show you a set of numbers, it's very, very efficient to multiply them all together. If I show you a big number, it's very, very computationally difficult to figure out which primes went into it. And so this has the neat ability where, like, if I show you a number, you can't say which primes are in that number. But if you want to verify one, I can say, okay, well, actually 37 is in there. You divide the big number by 37. Look, it comes out clean. It divides it. Okay, now I know that, say, 37 was in there. And so you can set up a system where just seeing the total, the accumulation, doesn't give away the members until you want to verify that a specific member is in there. And you can think of a useful real-world application, like there's a set of people. You want to represent this set of people to some other party without giving away who the actual members are. It's nice to there are situations that we can use this in order to verify like membership in a set without actually having to give away the members. Differential privacy leverages something similar, and unfortunately I don't think I'll be able to get into it just because of time constraints. But the general idea here is that we actually obfuscate the members of the set such that if you look at any single one, it's not a representation of what the actual member of the set is. But when you average together all of these different values, you get what that original value was. This works by adding a little bit of random noise to each one so that it's not what it was originally. But in the aggregation, you take the average of all of these things, and that random noise will average out, and you can get the actual result. Cool. So I think that's all we're going to get to tonight. I would have loved to talk about some anonymous credentials, but that will be for another time. So you can ignore the last bullet there. I want to open up for questions. I totally understand if you have to run.